Women are struggling without men. I have been thinking about this whole mess for a long time, and it is time we have a real talk about what is happening between men and women in this society because things have shifted in a way that we will never return from. And if you are out there still wondering why dates feel like traps or why so many guys are just done trying, then stick with me because by the end of this, you are going to see the full picture of how we got here and why men walking away is not some temporary phase, but a permanent change that is reshaping everything around us in ways women and the broader culture never saw coming. And it is going to force some hard truths to the surface that people have been avoiding for decades. If you are enjoying these angry guy videos and want to support the work, you can show some appreciation by buying me a Red Bull with a one time gift or setting up a monthly pledge using the link in the description of the video. It really helps keep things going without any outside pressure or agenda. The reality is that after years of women and society treating men like disposable providers and emotional punching bags while pushing this idea that men are toxic for simply existing, as men, a growing number of guys have reached their limit and decided to walk away completely from the dating game relationships and the whole provider role that used to define so much of male life. And this is not happening out of spite or anger in some childish way, but from a place of clear eyed truth where men have looked at the patterns, observed the risks and costs, and simply chosen peace over chaos. Because when you step back and examine it, honestly, the setup was never balanced, and men are now refusing to keep playing a rigged game where the deck is stacked against them from the start. Think about how, for decades, feminism and related movements painted masculinity as the root of all problems, telling men they were not needed, that their natural behaviors were harmful, and that women could have it all without any reciprocal effort or appreciation. And men listened to that message, absorbed it, and eventually acted on it by stepping aside and focusing on their own lives instead of chasing validation from a system that punished them for trying. You see it in the stories popping up everywhere now, where women head out on dates with no real intention of connecting or building something meaningful, and instead treat the evening like an all you can eat opportunity, ordering hundreds or even thousands of dollars worth of food and drinks while making it obvious through their words and energy that there is no follow through coming afterward. And guys used to go along with it out of a sense of obligation or hope, but those days are fading fast because men have gotten wiser to the pattern and are no longer willing to be the meal ticket for someone who views them as a walking wallet rather than a person worthy of genuine respect and interest. This foodie call trend that has been building is just one symptom of a deeper breakdown where women have been socialized to expect men to provide entertainment value and financial support without offering anything substantial in return. And when men start saying no by paying only their share and leaving the rest for the woman to handle, it exposes how unprepared so many are for the real world costs of their choices. Because in this economy where rent is high and jobs are uncertain, those free meals were acting as a hidden subsidy that is now being cut off, leaving a lot of women scrambling to cover bills they assumed would always be covered by someone else. When the check comes and the woman cannot pay or refuses to, the restaurant staff has no choice but to involve the authorities, and suddenly what started as a casual date turns into a legal issue with women being detained for skipping out on their obligations. And this is not some rare occurrence, but a sign of the broader shift where men are no longer shielding women from the harsh edges of accountability that everyone else has to face. And it serves as a sobering wake up call that the old dynamic of men as default protectors and providers has been rejected by both sides in different ways, leaving women to navigate realities they were never forced to confront before. Men have spent years being told they are expendable in relationships, courts, and culture at large through things like biased family laws that favor extraction of resources long after a relationship ends, or public shaming tactics where innocent behaviors get twisted into accusations that can ruin reputations overnight. And after Absorbing all that noise for so long, the logical response for many has been to disengage entirely and build a life that does not revolve around trying to meet impossible standards that shift whenever it is convenient. This walking away is not about hate or giving up, but about self preservation and rediscovering what actually brings fulfillment. When you are not constantly pouring energy into situations that drain you without replenishing anything meaningful. Because once men start prioritizing their own health, fitness hobbies, and financial stability, they realize how much lighter life feels without the weight of mismatched expectations and one sided efforts that defined so many past interactions. Society has created this environment where women are encouraged to view themselves as the prize simply for showing up, while men are expected to bring everything to the table, including emotional labor, financial security, and constant validation. Yet, when men point out the imbalance, they get labeled as problematic or insecure, instead of receiving honest reflection on how behaviors have contributed to the growing divide. The push and push from decades of messaging that men are toxic for taking up space or expressing natural traits like confidence or directness has led to a point where guys have internalized the idea that involvement carries too much risk for too little reward, and they are opting out in favor of solitude that brings clarity and calm rather than constant drama manufactured for attention or control. It is fascinating to watch from a distance how this plays out because men as a group tend to be minimalist by nature once they break free from external pressures, focusing on what serves them directly instead of maintaining systems that benefit others at their expense. And this leads to stronger personal outcomes with more time for self improvement, skill building, and genuine leisure that recharges rather than exhausts. Women, on the other hand, are starting to feel the effects of this mass disengagement as dates dry up, attention from quality men becomes scarce, and the realities of independent life without the traditional safety net hit harder in a tough economic climate where dual incomes or male provision used to smooth over challenges. But now, those supports are gone for good because men have learned through repeated patterns that their efforts are rarely matched with loyalty, respect, or fairness in return. The groups and apps created to share negative information about men under the guise of safety have backfired in a big way by fostering an atmosphere of distrust where everyone assumes the worst and men simply remove themselves from the arena altogether rather than risk being targeted or misrepresented. This is the sobering part that many do not want to hear, but it needs to be said plainly because ignoring it only prolongs the confusion and pain for everyone involved, and that is that female nature, when unchecked by mutual accountability, often leads to chaos, seeking behaviors designed to generate validation and resources without corresponding investment. And men have observed this through enough real world examples that they now trust their own eyes and experiences over words, promises, or social pressure to keep participating. In the past, men would step in to buffer women from the full weight of difficult choices or economic pressures. But after being told repeatedly that such protection is unwanted and oppressive, those same men have redirected that energy inward toward their own circles and goals, creating lives of relative comfort and control that do not depend on appeasing shifting demands. You can see evidence of this shift in everyday observations where more men are hitting the gym, focusing on trades or crypto building routines around solid sleep and simple pleasures, and finding that solitude is not loneliness, but freedom from the emotional roller coaster that comes with mismatched partnerships. And this rediscovery of self is powerful because it strips away the illusions that society sold about what men are supposed to be and replaces them with authentic living based on what actually works. The collapse of old relationship models is not some abstract theory, but something playing out in real time. as women express increasing frustration with finding reliable partners, while men continue to thrive in their independence. And the gap between those experiences is widening because one side is adapting by withdrawing while the other is still operating under assumptions that no longer hold. Men have always been the ones to face harsh realities head on and build solutions around them, but for generations, they extended that protection outward to shield women from similar struggles, only to have that generosity thrown back as entitlement or proof of male weakness. And now the script has flipped, with men applying that same resilience to their personal domains and leaving the broader societal fallout for others to manage without their intervention. This creates a vacuum where women who previously relied on male goodwill for financial, emotional, or practical support are confronting the limits of going it alone in an unforgiving world. And the wake up call is that no amount of public complaints or demands for men to return will undo the lessons learned from years of poor treatment and broken trust. The pattern recognition skills that men have honed through these experiences tell them clearly that observable actions speak louder than any declarations of change. And when those actions consistently show exploitation or disregard, it makes perfect sense to prioritize self reliance over repeated cycles of disappointment. In many ways, this movement of men walking away represents a return to a more natural state where individuals focus on what they can control and build rather than sacrificing endlessly for systems that punish the sacrifice. And this is leading to stronger, more centered men who are not burdened by unnecessary drama or financial drains. The food related incidents are just the visible tip of a much larger iceberg because they highlight how deeply the entitlement mindset has taken root and how quickly it crumbles when the expected support is withdrawn, forcing a reckoning with personal responsibility that should have been encouraged all along, but was instead sidelined in favor of narratives that blamed men for every imbalance. As more stories circulate of women facing legal consequences for not covering their own tabs or struggling with basic survival without male input, it underscores the fragility of the independence narrative that was promoted so aggressively, and men watching from the sidelines are not rushing in to fix it because they have finally learned that doing so only enables the same problems to continue. This is a raw truth, but one that carries real weight because it forces us to confront how gender dynamics have been distorted over time through cultural shifts that prioritized one side's narrative while ignoring the lived experiences of the other. And the result is a generation of men who have opted for peace through distance rather than conflict through engagement. The peace that comes with this choice is profound, allowing for deeper focus on personal growth hobbies and communities that actually uplift rather than extract. And it is something that cannot be easily reversed once experienced, because the contrast with previous stress filled attempts at connection is too stark to ignore. Society at large is feeling the ripples as birth rates drop, marriage rates fall, and social structures that relied on male participation and provision start to strain under the weight of absent contributions. And instead of addressing root causes like respect for male boundaries or fair treatment in institutions, the response has often been more shaming or demands, which only accelerates the withdrawal because men respond to logic and fairness, not guilt trips or coercion. The men who remain in the dating pool are approaching it with far more caution and standards than before, filtering heavily for genuine compatibility rather than surface level appeal. And this further raises the bar, making it even harder for those operating on outdated scripts to connect meaningfully. What we are witnessing is a fundamental realignment where men are no longer willing to be the default saviors or financial backups. And this forces a level of self sufficiency that tests the strength of modern ideals about empowerment, which turn out to be less robust when the external supports are removed. And the true test of character emerges in how one handles unfiltered reality without a safety net provided by the opposite sex. Men have found that living simply and intentionally brings a luxury of time and mental space that relationships often eroded through constant negotiation and compromise on core values. And this rediscovery is fueling a quiet revolution in male priorities that values authenticity over approval. The shocking conclusion that ties all this together is that women and society pushed men to the edge with decades of demonization and unequal expectations. And now that men have responded by walking away for good, there is no easy path back because the trust has been broken at a foundational level, and the peace found in solitude is proving far more rewarding than the chaos left behind. And this is the hard truth that explains why so many guys are thriving, while the other side grapples with unexpected loneliness and struggle. Continuing on this path, men are building lives that center around self mastery and selective involvement, choosing only interactions that add value rather than subtract. And this selective approach extends beyond dating into work, friendships, and leisure, creating a more balanced existence that does not revolve around fulfilling external demands that were never reciprocated fairly. The rhetorical question that hangs in the air for anyone paying attention is how long can a culture sustain itself when half the population disengages from its core reproductive and supportive roles? And the answer seems to be that adjustments will have to be made, but not before a period of significant discomfort that could have been avoided with more balanced messaging from the start. Men have internalized the lessons from paternity issues, court biases, and public harassment tactics that made everyday life feel like a minefield, and their response has been to minimize exposure to those risks by creating private worlds where they control the variables and outcomes, which leads to greater stability and satisfaction over time. This is not a retreat, but a strategic repositioning towards strength. And the stories of men embracing minimalism, working out trading learning skills, and simply resting more are becoming the norm because they represent a rejection of the high cost, low reward model that dominated for so long. As the economy tightens and social pressures mount, the absence of male willingness to subsidize lifestyles through dates or relationships is exposing cracks in the system that were papered over by previous generations, and women who once counted on that dynamic are now facing the full weight of their choices without the buffer they assumed would always be there. And this creates a sobering landscape where individual accountability becomes unavoidable. The straightforward fact is that men have had enough of being portrayed as villains for natural behaviors or providers without partnership, and their collective decision to step back is reshaping dating norms in real time, with more guys opting for self date nights or group activities that do not carry the same emotional and financial burdens. This transformation is happening gradually but steadily as each new generation of young men observes the outcomes for their older counterparts and chooses differently, prioritizing mental health and financial security over societal approval. And the result is a more resilient male population that is less susceptible to manipulation through guilt or shame because they have already walked through the fire and emerged clearer on what matters. The bar conversations like this one among friends reveal a shared understanding that the old ways are broken and rebuilding requires honesty about human nature rather than idealistic fantasies that ignore observable patterns of behavior and incentive structures. Men are learning to live with themselves in a deep way, accepting their strengths and limitations without needing constant external affirmation. And this self acceptance is the foundation that makes walking away not just possible, but preferable because it replaces dependency with independence and confusion with clarity. The downfall that some predicted for men who opt out has not materialized. Instead, many are reporting higher life satisfaction, lower stress, and better health outcomes, which only reinforces the choice and widens the gap between those who stay engaged in the old system and those who have moved on. In wrapping up this first part of the exploration, it is clear that the shift is profound and ongoing, with men finding peace in their solitude and refusing to return to dynamics that no longer serve them. And this serves as the foundation for understanding the larger changes unfolding around us as society adjusts to a new reality where male participation is no longer guaranteed, but earned through mutual respect and fairness that has been missing for too long. The patterns of women creating groups to rate and shame men or using social media to amplify negative stories have contributed to an atmosphere where trust is scarce, and men have responded by removing themselves from the equation entirely, choosing instead to invest in pursuits that yield tangible returns, like physical fitness skill, development, and personal hobbies that bring joy without the risk of betrayal or exploitation. This strategic withdrawal is not impulsive, but the result of accumulated experiences where promises of equality turned into expectations of male sacrifice without equivalent commitment from the other side. And once that realization sets in deeply, it becomes nearly impossible to unsee or ignore in future interactions. The economic angle adds another layer because in times of inflation and uncertainty, the willingness of men to absorb extra costs for dates or relationships has evaporated, leaving women to confront the true price of their independence, and many are finding it steeper than anticipated without the traditional male role to offset expenses or provide emergency support. Restaurants calling authorities when bills go unpaid is a stark illustration of how the safety nets have frayed, and it highlights the need for everyone to approach interactions with clear intentions and financial readiness rather than assumptions of chivalry that are no longer extended freely. Men who have embraced this path often describe a sense of rediscovery where they reconnect with aspects of themselves that were suppressed in the pursuit of approval or partnership, and this leads to more authentic living with routines built around what energizes them personally, whether that is early mornings at the gym, evenings with meaningful projects, or simply quiet time for reflection and rest that was previously interrupted by relational demands. The authoritative truth here is that human relationships thrive only when both parties bring value and accountability to the table. And when that balance is lost, the healthy response is not to keep forcing it, but to step away and allow natural consequences to teach the necessary lessons. This wake up call extends to the broader culture because the disengagement of men from dating and family formation is already influencing everything from housing markets to consumer trends, as single men focus their resources on self improvement and leisure, creating new economic flows that do not center on traditional couple based spending. The raw reality is that women pushed the narrative of male disposability for years through media education and social movements, and men have now taken that message to heart by becoming truly independent in ways that challenge the status quo and force a reevaluation of what sustainable dynamics look like moving forward. As more men share their positive experiences with solitude and self focus, the momentum builds because it proves that the fears of lifelong misery were overstated and the actual outcome is often greater freedom and contentment than what was available in unbalanced relationships. This is the core premise that ties everything together. And it is why the trend is not reversing, despite calls for men to return, because the peace they have found is genuine and hard won after years of navigating a landscape designed to extract from them without fair exchange. The storytelling element here is one of collective awakening, where individual men across different backgrounds reach similar conclusions through their own observations and decide to chart a new course that prioritizes their well being. And this creates a powerful ripple effect that is changing social norms without any centralized coordination, just shared recognition of what works and what does not. The intensity of this change cannot be overstated because it represents a break from centuries of assumed roles, and the adjustment period is revealing truths about resilience and adaptability that were always present but rarely tested in this particular way. Men are minimalist at heart. Once the noise is stripped away, keeping what serves them and releasing what drains them, and this approach is yielding lives of quiet luxury defined not by excess, but by control and contentment that comes from aligning actions with internal values rather than external pressures. The sobering part for society is that this shift happened organically as a response to repeated imbalances. And now that it is established, it will take genuine systemic changes to encourage re engagement. But those changes must address the root issues of respect, fairness, and accountability rather than more demands on men to ignore their experiences. This narrative of walking away is filled with examples of men who have transformed their daily lives by focusing on health, wealth, and personal peace. And the contrast with the struggles reported on the other side only highlights the effectiveness of the choice and encourages more to follow the same path toward self determination. The direct truth is that sorry will not be enough to undo the damage from years of poor treatment and demonization because men have moved on to a place of strength and independence that does not require reconciliation on the old terms. And this permanent change is the new foundation upon which future interactions will be built if they happen at all. Expanding further on these dynamics, it becomes evident that the cultural messages around masculinity being problematic created a generation of men who internalized caution and eventually opted for complete disengagement as the safest and most rewarding strategy. And this has led to innovations in lifestyle design, where guys create custom routines that maximize their strengths and minimize vulnerabilities in an unpredictable world. The bar talk feel of this conversation is important because these are the kinds of honest discussions happening among friends who have seen the same patterns and reached the same conclusions without needing academic studies or media spin, just real life observation over time. Women experiencing the consequences of foodie calls turning into legal issues or empty social calendars are part of a larger story of unmet expectations meeting harsh reality, and men are not positioned as the villains in this tale, but as individuals who have chosen to stop participating in setups that coincidentally disadvantage them. And this choice is both logical and necessary for personal growth. The rhetorical pacing here allows us to sit with the weight of these changes because they are not fleeting, but foundational shifts that will influence family structures, economic models, and social cohesion for years to come. And understanding them clearly is the first step toward navigating the future with eyes wide open. Men have learned to trust pattern recognition over smooth words because repeated cycles of investment without return have taught them the value of caution. And this wisdom is protecting them from repeating past mistakes while opening doors to new forms of fulfillment that do not depend on the approval or participation of women in the traditional sense. The authoritative rawness of this truth is that society told men they were not needed. And after a period of adjustment, men have proven they can thrive without the burdens that came with that need. And this independence is empowering in ways that benefit the men directly, even as it challenges the broader narrative of interdependence that assumed male provision as a given. As we continue exploring this topic, it is crucial to recognize that the peace men find in solitude is not isolation, but a deliberate choice for quality over quantity in all areas of life. And this mindset shift is leading to stronger communities among like minded men who support each other without the drama that often accompanied mixed gender interactions in the past. The wake up call element is that ignoring these trends will not make them disappear. And the sooner everyone acknowledges the validity of men's experiences with unfair treatment, the sooner real dialogue can replace blame and demands. This brings us deeper into the implications for future generations, where young men growing up in this environment are likely to adopt similar strategies of caution and self focus from an earlier age, having witnessed the outcomes for their fathers, uncles, and peers. And this could lead to even more pronounced shifts in how relationships form or fail to form in the coming decades. The straightforward approach is to accept that change has occurred and adapt accordingly rather than clinging to models that no longer reflect the realities on the ground. And men have already done this by walking away and finding success on their own terms. The full long form of this discussion reveals layer after layer of how behaviors, incentives, and cultural signals interacted to produce the current state. And men have responded with adaptability that is a hallmark of their nature when faced with adversity, focusing on solutions that work for them personally. This is not the end of the story, but the beginning of a new chapter where individual choice drives outcomes more than collective pressure. And the men who have embraced this are reporting lives of greater authenticity and satisfaction that stand in contrast to the struggles faced by those still entangled in the old ways. Continuing this narrative, we see that the demonization of men through terms like toxic masculinity or movements that generalized negative behaviors to the entire group created a backlash of disengagement that was predictable once enough. Men connected the dots and decided enough was enough. And this backlash is not aggressive, but quiet and powerful in its simplicity of simply stepping aside. The barroom honesty is that many guys feel relieved once they make the decision because the constant effort to prove worthiness in a system designed to find fault evaporates, and what remains is space for genuine self expression and growth without apology. Women demanding free meals or using dates as content opportunities without reciprocal interest have accelerated this trend by making the costs of participation too obvious to ignore. And men responding by leaving mid date or refusing to cover full bills are exercising the same boundaries that were often denied to them in other contexts, and this assertion of self respect is long overdue. The sobering wake up call is that these incidents are symptoms of deeper entitlement issues that developed over time, and without correction, they will continue to erode trust and connection until the natural consequences force a reset. Men focusing on crypto trading, video games, fitness, and skill building are not wasting time, but investing in assets that appreciate in personal value. And this strategic redirection of energy is yielding dividends in confidence, health, and financial independence that make returning to unbalanced dynamics unappealing. The authoritative perspective here is that true strength lies in knowing when to engage and when to withdraw, and men have applied that wisdom to protect their peace and build lives that align with their core needs rather than societal scripts that no longer serve. This comprehensive look at the situation shows a clear trajectory where more men join the ranks of those who have walked away each month as awareness spreads through personal networks and observations, and the cumulative effect is a transformation in male culture that emphasizes self reliance, resilience, and selective involvement over default provision and sacrifice. The raw truth that ties it together is that after being told to go away and being treated accordingly, men have done exactly that and found that the other side of the equation holds more fulfillment than the struggle ever did, and this discovery is what makes the change permanent. The continuation of this raw examination reveals how the economic pressures of modern life have amplified the decision for men to step back entirely. Because when wages stagnate against rising costs, and the expectation remains that men should absorb the majority of dating and household expenses without equivalent commitment, the math simply stops adding up for anyone paying close attention to their own long term stability. In a world where housing prices have skyrocketed and everyday necessities demand more of each paycheck, the idea of taking on additional financial loads For someone who views the arrangement as transactional entertainment rather than mutual investment feels like a losing proposition that no rational person would repeatedly sign up for. And this calculation has led countless men to redirect their resources toward personal savings investments in skills or assets that grow independently of relational variables. Society has undergone a quiet restructuring where traditional pathways to family and partnership, once seen as automatic milestones, have become optional detours filled with legal, financial, and emotional hazards that men have learned to avoid through direct observation of friends, colleagues, and public examples, showing repeated patterns of one sided accountability where courts and cultural narratives favor extraction over fairness. And this avoidance is not cowardice, but intelligent risk management honed by decades of evidence that participation often leads to diminished returns on life satisfaction. The storytelling aspect emerges when we consider how entire communities of men have organically formed around shared recognition of these imbalances, creating informal networks where advice flows freely on optimizing solo living, from meal prepping strategies that maximize nutrition on a budget to negotiating better career moves that prioritize flexibility over status symbols designed to impress potential partners who may never reciprocate the effort. This shift carries profound implications for future social structures because as fewer men pursue long term commitments, the downstream effects touch everything from declining birth rates that strain pension systems and workforce sustainability to changing consumer behaviors, where single men channel spending into durable goods, experiences, and self development rather than family oriented purchases that once propped up entire industries. And the sobering realization is that these changes were set in motion by cultural signals that underestimated male adaptability when pushed beyond reasonable limits. Women facing the pinch of this withdrawal often express surprise at the speed and permanence of it all, as if the warnings embedded in male disengagement over the years were invisible, until the empty calendars and struggling independent finances made them undeniable. And yet the response has frequently been more calls for men to return rather than honest introspection on how behaviors and societal messaging contributed to the exodus. Men have embraced a form of minimalist philosophy that strips away unnecessary complications, allowing them to focus on core elements like physical conditioning, mental clarity, and financial autonomy, which together create a buffer against the uncertainties of an economy that rewards self reliance more than ever before. And this approach stands in stark contrast to lifestyles built on external validation or shared dependencies that proved fragile when tested by real world frictions. The authoritative truth here is that human beings, especially men, respond to incentives. And when the incentive structure in dating and relationships tilts heavily toward cost without benefit, the natural outcome is withdrawal, followed by reconstruction of life on more sustainable terms. And this reconstruction is happening at scale across demographics as pattern recognition becomes a survival tool rather than an afterthought. Rhetorically, one must pause to consider the historical parallels where civilizations that lost balance between genders in terms of respect and contribution experienced periods of decline until new equilibria emerged, often through necessity rather than choice. And our current trajectory mirrors those patterns, with men choosing internal empire building over external battles that yield no territory worth holding. And the peace derived from this choice is not passive, but actively cultivated through routines that reinforce strength and independence daily. The raw edge comes through when examining how public shaming tactics, once effective at compelling male compliance, have lost their power because men have developed thicker skin through repeated exposure, and now view such efforts as confirmation that disengagement was the correct path rather than a reason to re enter the fray. In this evolving landscape, the concept of solitude transforms from something feared to something refined, where men discover layers of personal potential that were previously overshadowed by relational maintenance. And this discovery fuels innovation in personal projects, from building custom workspaces to mastering trades that provide both income and pride without needing approval from external gatekeepers who shift standards unpredictably. The wake up call intensifies when we acknowledge that the food related incidents at restaurants represent only surface level symptoms of a deeper financial disconnect, where assumptions of male provision clash with current realities of female economic struggles in high cost environments. And as men refuse to bridge that gap, the resulting accountability moments serve as teaching tools that no amount of social media outrage can erase. Men are channeling their energy into areas that yield compounding returns, such as cryptocurrency exploration. For those inclined toward analytical challenges or consistent gym disciplines that build not just muscle, but discipline and resilience that translate across all life domains. And this redirection creates a virtuous cycle where each improvement reinforces the decision to maintain distance from dynamics that previously drained those same resources without replenishment. The straightforward observation is that female nature includes tendencies toward testing boundaries and seeking maximum benefit with minimal cost, which, when unchecked by mutual standards, leads to the kinds of exploitative patterns we see playing out. And men, recognizing this through accumulated experiences, have chosen to remove themselves as the primary targets, becoming observers rather than participants in the unfolding consequences. This narrative unfolds like a slow building wave, where initial drops in male engagement gradually swell into societal transformations, affecting everything from dating app metrics showing declining activity among quality users to broader cultural conversations that struggle to address root causes without resorting to familiar blame patterns that only deepen the divide. And the men at the center of this wave report consistent gains in life contentment that make reversal unlikely without fundamental changes in how respect and fairness are practiced. The bar conversation tone here captures the essence of Friends, unpacking these realities over time, acknowledging that while the changes feel disruptive, they stem from logical responses to years of accumulated imbalances rather than sudden whims. And this acknowledgement fosters clearer thinking about personal boundaries moving forward, expanding on the psychological dimensions. Men who have walked away often describe a lifting of constant mental load that came with navigating mixed signals, entitlement, and potential legal pitfalls, allowing cognitive resources to flow toward creative problem solving, career advancement, and genuine leisure that restores rather than depletes. And this mental liberation stands as one of the most underappreciated benefits of the shift, because it enables deeper self knowledge that relationships under the old models rarely permitted. Society must confront the fact that demonizing natural male traits like direct communication or spatial awareness through concepts designed to criminalize normal behavior created an environment where men felt perpetually on trial, and their response of stepping out of the courtroom entirely represents a healthy boundary setting that protects psychological well being in an increasingly hostile cultural climate. The economic independence men are achieving through focused careers or side ventures allows them to craft lifestyles of quiet comfort, where decisions about spending time or money remain fully their own without negotiation or justification. And this autonomy breeds confidence that permeates other areas, making them less susceptible to guilt based appeals or societal pressures to resume provider roles that history shows lead to exploitation when unbalanced. Rhetorically, we can ask what happens when a significant portion of the population opts for self containment, and the answer emerging is a reshaping of norms where quality interactions become rarer but potentially more meaningful for those who earn them, while the majority on both sides adjust to new baselines of interaction that prioritize individual sovereignty over assumed interdependence. Men have learned the hard way that words and social performances often mask underlying intentions focused on resource extraction rather than partnership. And this lesson has sharpened their discernment, leading to highly selective engagement only with those who demonstrate consistency through actions rather than declarations, which raises the overall standard and filters out superficial connections that dominated previous eras. The sobering aspect lies in how women adapting to this new reality are discovering the true cost of independence in areas like housing security and daily provisions where male subsidies once masked inefficiencies, and the resulting struggles highlight the importance of realistic self assessment over idealized narratives of effortless empowerment. This transformation carries storytelling weight as we witness generations adjusting in real time, with younger men absorbing lessons from older ones through informal channels and choosing paths that emphasize skill acquisition over chase dynamics, which positions them for greater long term success in uncertain times where adaptability trumps traditional scripts. The authoritative rawness is that pushing men to the margins through legal biases, public accusations, and cultural narratives has backfired by creating a class of highly self sufficient individuals who no longer need or seek validation from the systems that marginalize them, and this independence is their greatest strength in the evolving social order. Continuing this exploration, one sees how leisure time for men has become a canvas for personal mastery, whether through strategic gaming that builds tactical thinking or outdoor pursuits that foster physical toughness and mental clarity. And these activities replace the draining cycles of dating with fulfilling routines that align with innate drives for competence and achievement without external drama interfering. The patterns of chaos creation for attention that men observed in past relationships have lost their appeal entirely, as solitude offers cleaner, more predictable outcomes that support long term goals rather than short term emotional highs followed by inevitable crashes. In broader terms, the withdrawal of men from default participation forces a reckoning with human nature that polite society avoided for decades, acknowledging that both genders possess strengths and tendencies that require balance and accountability to function harmoniously. And without that balance, the system tilts until correction occurs through natural consequences rather than top down mandates. Men thriving in their chosen paths demonstrate that fulfillment does not require traditional markers of success like marriage or constant companionship, but can emerge from disciplined self direction and selective community building among those who share similar values of respect and reciprocity. The wake up call deepens when considering the impact on innovation and productivity, because men freed from relational overhead often pour surplus energy into entrepreneurial efforts, technical skills, or community projects that benefit themselves and potentially society at large, creating value that flows from personal peace rather than obligated sacrifice. And this redirection may prove more sustainable than previous models reliant on uneven contributions. The straightforward truth remains that after repeated cycles of being positioned as villains or walking wallets, men have internalized the message of independence and are living it fully, finding that the world opens up when one stops carrying burdens not meant for them alone. This segment of the discussion underscores how cultural movements intended to elevate one group inadvertently diminish the foundational contributions of another, leading to voluntary disengagement that no amount of shaming can reverse, because the peace discovered on the other side outweighs the promised benefits of re engagement under unfair conditions. Men are building empires of one through consistent habits that compound into significant personal advantages, from financial cushions that protect against downturns to social circles based on mutual uplift rather than competition or extraction. And this foundation supports a level of contentment that previous generations tied too closely to external relationships. Rhetorically, the question arises whether society will learn from these developments by fostering genuine equity or continue patterns that accelerate the divide, and current indicators suggest the latter in many circles, where demands replace dialogue, but men remain unfazed, focusing instead on what they control and letting the chips fall where they may. The raw honesty is that female entitlement, built over decades through media and policy, has met its match in male pattern recognition and self preservation instincts, which together form an impenetrable barrier to returning to status quo dynamics that served few well in the end. As more men embrace this lifestyle, the visible success stories of improved health, stronger finances, and authentic happiness serve as beacons, encouraging others to follow without fanfare or coercion, simply through the power of demonstrated results that speak louder than any campaign or appeal. The narrative here is one of quiet revolution, where individual choices accumulate into cultural transformation, reshaping expectations around gender roles in ways that prioritize personal agency over collective obligation. And men have positioned themselves advantageously within this new framework. This brings us to the deeper societal fabric, where institutions like education and law, that once assumed male participation as a given, must now contend with reduced male investment, leading to adjustments in everything from curriculum design to policy reforms that address fairness if they hope to regain trust and involvement from the disengaged population. Men have found that solitude allows for profound self reflection that reveals core values unclouded by external noise, and this clarity guides better decision making across life domains, creating ripple effects of stability that contrast sharply with the volatility of unbalanced partnerships. The authoritative perspective holds that true progress requires acknowledging uncomfortable truths about behavioral patterns and incentive responses rather than perpetuating myths of universal benevolence. And men, by walking away, have forced that acknowledgement through their absence, making the conversation unavoidable in honest circles. The sobering reality is that the downfall women face in this environment stems not from malice, but from the logical endpoint of pushing boundaries too far without reciprocal understanding, and men observing from their positions of peace have no incentive to interrupt the learning process that must unfold naturally. Expanding further, the minimalist tendencies of men allow them to thrive with less clutter, both physical and emotional, leading to environments optimized for focus and recovery, which in turn boosts overall life quality in measurable ways, from better sleep to sharper decision making that compounds advantages over time. This approach stands as a direct counter to consumerist pressures that once tied male worth to provision levels, and by rejecting those chains, men reclaim narrative control over their own stories of success, defined internally rather than through comparison or expectation. The rhetorical pacing of these changes shows a steady march toward greater male self determination, where each step away from old models reveals new opportunities for growth that were previously obscured by the demands of maintaining appearances in mismatched dynamics, and this revelation fuels continued momentum in the trend. Men report that trusting observable reality over social narratives has been liberating, allowing them to build lives grounded in facts rather than hopes. And this grounding provides resilience against future cultural shifts that might attempt to pull them back into unbalanced roles. The continuation of this talk digs into how technological advancements have accelerated the great male withdrawal by exposing patterns at scale that previous generations could only glimpse through personal anecdotes. Now, dating apps and social platforms serve as massive data collectors, revealing the same cycles of mismatched expectations and one sided efforts repeatedly across thousands of interactions, which allows men to connect the dots faster and with greater confidence, leading them to exit the arena before investing heavily in pursuits that statistical evidence shows rarely deliver mutual satisfaction. In this digital age, where algorithms amplify voices and behaviors, the visibility of women openly discussing strategies for maximizing benefits while minimizing commitment has stripped away any remaining illusions about the nature of modern interactions, pushing men toward tools and communities that prioritize verifiable compatibility over hype. And this technological transparency acts as a catalyst for the self preservation mindset that now defines a growing segment of the male population. Society finds itself at a crossroads where the traditional assumption that men will always fill the gaps in economic and social structures no longer holds, because after witnessing how policies in family law and public discourse consistently disadvantage male contributions, many have chosen to build parallel systems of support that operate independently of those flawed frameworks, creating informal economies of knowledge sharing and resource pooling among like minded individuals who value fairness and reciprocity above all else. The storytelling rhythm of this evolution shows men moving from reactive frustration to proactive reconstruction, where they redesign daily existence around principles of efficiency and personal sovereignty, turning what could have been a period of bitterness into one of quiet empowerment that strengthens their position in an unpredictable world. One cannot overlook the health dimensions embedded in this shift, because when men remove themselves from environments filled with emotional volatility and financial strain, they often experience measurable improvements in sleep, quality immune function, and overall vitality, as the body responds positively to reduce cortisol levels and increase focus on restorative habits like consistent training, nutritious eating, and uninterrupted rest, which collectively compound into a more robust physical presence that further reinforces their independence. This bodily reclamation stands as a powerful testament to the idea that aligning life with observable truths rather than cultural fictions yields tangible rewards that no external validation can match. And men embracing this path report feeling more grounded and capable than they did during years of chasing approval in unbalanced dynamics. The philosophical undercurrents here trace back to fundamental questions of human agency and responsibility, where men have essentially declared through their actions that they will no longer outsource their well being to systems or individuals that treat their efforts as infinite resources to be tapped without replenishment. And this declaration echoes ancient ideas of Stoic self mastery, updated for contemporary challenges where the battlefield is no longer physical but cultural and economic. In practical terms, this means prioritizing trades and skills that offer direct value exchange in the marketplace rather than professions tied to status seeking that historically served as mating signals but now carry diminishing returns when the mating market itself has become distorted by unrealistic expectations and entitlement. Rhetorically, we must consider the ripple effects on innovation, because when a large cohort of men redirects their creative energies away from family centric projects toward personal ventures in technology, craftsmanship, or intellectual pursuits, the landscape of human achievement begins to tilt toward solutions that emphasize durability, scalability, and individual empowerment over temporary relational fixes. And this redirection may ultimately benefit civilization by producing breakthroughs unencumbered by the need to appease shifting social demands. The raw truth emerges when examining how younger generations of boys growing up amid these visible changes absorb lessons about self reliance earlier than their predecessors, developing skepticism toward mainstream narratives that promise fulfillment through partnership without acknowledging the hard work of maintaining balance. And this early pattern recognition equips them to navigate adulthood with clearer boundaries and fewer illusions. Women confronting the sustained absence of male engagement in casual or serious contexts often turn to heightened efforts at self promotion through digital means. Yet these attempts frequently highlight the same patterns of seeking attention and resources without offering equivalent stability, which only solidifies male resolve to maintain distance and focus inward, where outcomes remain under their direct control. The authoritative observation is that sustainable societies require both genders to operate from positions of strength and accountability rather than one side bearing disproportionate loads, while the other claims perpetual victimhood or prize status, and the current imbalance has forced a corrective pause through male disengagement that demands honest reevaluation if reconnection is ever to occur on equitable terms. This phase of the discussion highlights how environmental factors like urban living costs and remote work opportunities have enabled men to craft lifestyles detached from traditional urban dating pressures, allowing relocations to more affordable regions or rural settings where self sufficiency becomes not just possible, but advantageous. And these moves strip away layers of societal noise, revealing core human needs for purpose and peace that relationships under duress could never fulfill. Men are discovering that true luxury lies in time sovereignty, where days unfold according to internal rhythms rather than external calendars filled with obligations designed to extract value. And this freedom fosters creativity in areas ranging from artistic expression to scientific inquiry, unhindered by the need to perform for potential partners. The sobering wake up call extends to educational institutions, where declining male enrollment signals a broader rejection of systems perceived as hostile to male development, with boys and young men opting for apprenticeships, trade schools, or self directed learning paths that align better with their strengths and provide faster routes to independence than prolonged academic environments that emphasize compliance over competence. This educational realignment carries long term consequences for workforce composition and innovation pipelines as men channel their capabilities into practical fields that reward results over rhetoric, creating pockets of excellence that operate outside mainstream cultural influence and demonstrate the viability of alternative success models. In examining the legal landscape, one sees how accumulated biases in areas of custody support and harassment claims have taught men the value of minimizing entanglements that could lead to indefinite financial obligations or reputational damage. And their response has been to document interactions meticulously or avoid ambiguous situations altogether, which further reduces overall participation in mixed gender spaces and accelerates the formation of male only or male dominant professional and social circles. The straightforward reality is that trust, once eroded, requires extraordinary evidence to rebuild. And after decades of examples showing how good intentions can be weaponized against men, the default setting has shifted toward caution and self containment as the wisest course for preserving personal integrity and resources. This narrative builds momentum when we consider the cultural artifacts emerging from this movement, from online forums dedicated to minimalist living strategies to content creators showcasing high value solo lifestyles that inspire others to experiment with similar approaches. And these shared resources create a feedback loop of improvement where each success story validates the path and encourages broader adoption without centralized coordination or ideological fervor. Men have internalized the lesson that their value does not depend on rescuing others from self created difficulties, but on cultivating their own gardens of capability and contentment, which in turn positions them as optional participants in society rather than mandatory pillars expected to hold everything together regardless of treatment. Absolutely. The psychological resilience developed through this process allows men to face economic downturns or social upheavals with greater equanimity because their happiness derives from internal metrics of progress rather than relational status or external praise. And this mental fortitude becomes a competitive advantage in turbulent times where adaptability determines outcomes more than inherited advantages. Rhetorically, one wonders about the potential for hybrid futures where selective re engagement occurs only under strictly defined conditions of mutual respect and transparency. Yet, current trends suggest that such hybrids will remain rare until systemic reforms address the foundational grievances that prompted the initial withdrawal. Expanding into the realm of community building, men are forging bonds based on shared interests and proven reliability rather than proximity or romantic pursuit, creating support networks that provide mentorship, camaraderie, and practical assistance without the complications that often arise in broader social mixing. And these communities serve as incubators for personal growth, where accountability to self and chosen peers replaces vague societal expectations. The authoritative rawness here lies in recognizing that human nature includes both cooperative and self interested elements, which require careful structuring to prevent exploitation. And men, by stepping back, have essentially redesigned their social contracts to favor structures that minimize downside risks while maximizing personal agency. This brings forward the health of future generations as a critical consideration because children born into environments where fathers are present by choice rather than obligation tend to inherit models of self respect and boundary setting that could break cycles of dysfunction if the current pause in family formation leads to more intentional pairings down the line. Or alternatively, society may see smaller but higher quality family units emerging from those who navigate the changed landscape successfully. Women adapting to these realities through increased focus on career skills or self reliance may eventually contribute to a more balanced dynamic if the lessons of accountability take hold. But the process appears gradual and marked by resistance as old habits die hard in the face of uncomfortable truths. Men thriving in solitude often pursue intellectual hobbies like reading philosophy, history, or scientific literature that deepen their understanding of human behavior and societal cycles, providing context for their own choices and reinforcing the wisdom of prioritizing long term stability over short term comforts that carry hidden costs. This intellectual engagement transforms what could be idle time into periods of profound insight where connections between past civilizations and present challenges become clear, highlighting how ignoring gender balance has repeatedly led to instability until corrective measures restored equilibrium through necessity. The wake up call resonates strongly when viewing the broader economic indicators, such as shifting consumer spending patterns, where male dollars flow into durable tools, experiences, and investments rather than transient dating expenses or family subsidies, which alters market signals and encourages businesses to adapt to a demographic increasingly oriented towards self optimization. This economic pivot demonstrates the power of collective, individual choices to reshape systems without formal organization. As men, simply voting with their wallets and time, create new demand curves that favor products and services aligned with independence and capability building. In deeper reflection, the raw truth about female nature that men have observed involves an inclination toward hypergamy and resource seeking that, when amplified by cultural permission structures, leads to widespread dissatisfaction on both sides because it undermines the mutual investment required for lasting bonds. And by removing themselves from this dynamic, men force a confrontation with those tendencies that polite conversation has long avoided. The storytelling element captures individual journeys of men who once invested heavily in relationships only to face repeated disappointments and emerged wiser, choosing instead paths of deliberate simplicity, where every action serves a clear purpose, unclouded by external drama. This comprehensive examination reveals how the interplay of biology, culture, and technology has converged to produce a male population more discerning and self directed than ever before, with profound implications for everything from urban planning to cultural production. As society adjusts to a reality where male energy flows primarily toward self and selected communities rather than default provision. The sobering aspect is that reversing this trend would require not just apologies, but structural overhauls, proving through consistent actions that fairness has returned. Yet few signs point in that direction, leaving men to continue refining their independent approaches. Men are leveraging advancements in personal finance tools and automation to secure their futures with minimal ongoing effort, allowing greater freedom for exploration and mastery in chosen domains, whether physical, mental, or creative. And this leverage multiplies the benefits of their withdrawal, creating lives that previous generations tied to constant labor could scarcely imagine. The authoritative perspective holds that true maturity involves accepting human limitations and designing around them rather than pretending equality of outcomes erases differences and tendencies. And men, by doing so, have modeled a form of realism that benefits their own peace, even as it challenges collective assumptions. Continuing this thread, the impact on creative industries becomes evident as male artists, writers, and inventors, freed from relational maintenance, produce works that explore themes of self discovery, resilience, and critique of modern absurdities, unfiltered by the need to appeal to female sensibilities or mainstream approval, which enriches the cultural landscape with authentic voices that might otherwise have remained suppressed. This creative surge represents another layer of the transformation, where energy previously dissipated in unproductive cycles now fuels innovation and expression that stands on its own merits. The rhetorical flow leads us to ponder the long arc of civilizational development, where periods of gender tension often precede major realignments. And our era appears poised for such a shift as male disengagement compels innovation in areas like artificial companionship, elder care, and economic models that reduce reliance on traditional family structures, though, whether these innovations fully compensate remains an open question that time will answer through observable results. Men have found that maintaining clear personal standards acts as a filter, preserving their energy for what matters most. And this boundary work, though initially challenging, becomes second nature, yielding relationships or lack thereof that honor their worth rather than diminish it. The ongoing exploration of these dynamics takes us into the realm of historical cycles, where societies that drifted too far from balanced gender contributions often faced periods of stagnation or reconfiguration, as the protective and productive capacities of men were redirected inward, leading to innovations born from necessity rather than obligation. And our current moment echoes those earlier transitions, with men cultivating personal domains of expertise that range from sustainable living practices to advanced problem solving in fields that reward precision over persuasion. This historical lens provides context for why the current withdrawal feels both inevitable and corrective, Because when one half of the population absorbs decades of messaging that frames their core traits as liabilities, the rational adaptation involves retreating to rebuild on foundations of self trust and observable competence rather than continuing to subsidize systems that penalize the subsidizer. Men navigating this new territory frequently develop heightened awareness of resource allocation, turning everyday decisions into strategic choices that favor longevity over immediacy, whether that means mastering home maintenance skills to avoid dependency on external services or honing negotiation abilities in professional settings that ensure fair exchanges without emotional overhead from personal entanglements. And this strategic mindset creates compounding advantages that elevate overall life quality in ways that feel earned and sustainable. The barroom candor in unpacking all this reveals a collective sigh of relief among guys who have stepped back because the constant pressure to perform as emotional, financial, and social fixers evaporates, leaving room for authentic pursuits that align with natural drives for mastery and autonomy, rather than endless accommodation of demands that rarely acknowledge the effort involved. Looking ahead, the projections for societal adjustment point toward a landscape where institutions must evolve to accommodate reduced male default involvement in areas like volunteerism, mentorship, and community leadership, prompting the rise of more targeted initiatives that appeal to self interest and proven value rather than guilt based appeals, which have lost their effectiveness after years of overuse. And this evolution could foster more resilient structures if approached with honesty about human motivations, instead of clinging to idealistic models that ignore pattern based realities. Women encountering prolonged periods of limited genuine engagement from high value men often experience a forced recalibration of priorities, shifting toward tangible skill development or lifestyle simplification that builds internal resilience, though the transition involves grappling with the gap between promoted ideals of effortless independence and the practical demands of maintaining stability without traditional support networks. The philosophical depth here touches on concepts of existential freedom, where men, by rejecting scripted roles, have claimed agency over their narratives, crafting identities rooted in competence, peace, and selective connection rather than broad societal approval. And this reclamation echoes timeless ideas about the examined life yielding greater fulfillment than one lived according to external dictates, especially when those dictates have proven inconsistent with fair treatment. In practical application, this manifests as men experimenting with alternative living arrangements such as shared intentional communities focused on mutual self improvement or solo setups optimized for efficiency that minimize waste and maximize control over daily environments, leading to reduced stress and increased capacity for meaningful contributions on their own terms. Rhetorically considering the interplay between biology and culture reveals how innate male tendencies toward provision and protection, when met with consistent devaluation, transform into focused self provision and self protection, creating a feedback mechanism that strengthens individual outcomes while highlighting the limitations of cultural narratives that downplayed these tendencies as problematic rather than essential balancing forces. The sobering element surfaces when acknowledging that future family formations may become more deliberate and less frequent, resulting in smaller but potentially more stable units where both parties enter with clear understanding of mutual expectations forged through the lessons of this disengagement period. And such intentionality could elevate the quality of those bonds, even if overall numbers decline. Men deepening their engagement with practical philosophies often draw from Stoic principles or modern interpretations that emphasize controlling what lies within one's influence, which in this context means directing energy toward health, finances, and personal projects while releasing attachment to outcomes involving others who have not demonstrated reciprocity. And this mental framework builds unshakable inner stability that withstands external pressures or cultural shifts. The raw honesty in these conversations among friends highlights how previous generations might have endured imbalances out of duty or lack of alternatives, but contemporary access to information and community validation has empowered men to choose different paths without shame, recognizing that self preservation is not selfishness, but necessary maintenance of the foundational element that once supported broader structures. This phase uncovers impacts on creative expression, where men liberated from performative aspects of dating pour creative energies into personal arts, music writing, or invention, producing works that capture authentic experiences of independence, resilience, and critique of unbalanced social contracts, enriching the cultural commons with perspectives unfiltered by the need to appeal across divided lines. The authoritative view holds that sustainable progress depends on recognizing and integrating the distinct contributions and boundaries of both genders, rather than attempting to erase differences through policy or rhetoric. And the current male response of withdrawal serves as a natural mechanism to enforce that recognition when other avenues have been ignored, expanding into environmental and lifestyle considerations. Men opting for simpler footprints through minimal possessions and localized living reduce overall consumption in ways that align personal values with planetary realities, creating models of sufficiency that contrast with lifestyles built on constant acquisition to signal status or attract partners. And this alignment fosters a sense of congruence that enhances daily satisfaction. The wake up call intensifies as we observe how educational reforms may need to incorporate more hands on skill based learning to re engage young men who have grown wary of systems perceived as stacked against their success trajectories. And such adaptations could harness male potential more effectively by aligning with strengths in spatial, mechanical, and strategic thinking rather than forcing conformity to mismatched methodologies. In the realm of long term legacy, building men focused on self development often invest in knowledge transfer through mentoring within trusted circles or documenting personal insights for future reference, creating informal archives of wisdom that preserve hard earned lessons about boundaries, risk assessment, and fulfillment outside conventional pathways. And this legacy work provides purpose that transcends individual lifespan without requiring biological offspring or traditional family structures. The straightforward truth is that after absorbing years of contradictory messaging about male value, men have synthesized their experiences into a coherent philosophy of selective engagement that prioritizes depth over breadth in all interactions, leading to richer personal lives, even as broader social participation wanes. This narrative thread weaves through considerations of mental fortitude, where the absence of chronic relational stress allows for clearer thought processes and emotional regulation, enabling men to tackle challenges with focused determination rather than divided attention. And this clarity often translates into breakthroughs in personal projects or career advancements that further solidify their independent standing. Rhetorically, the question of cultural adaptation looms large as societies grapple with adjusting norms around success, fulfillment, and contribution. When a significant demographic opts for internal metrics over external ones, and the answers will emerge through trial and observation rather than top down prescriptions that have proven ineffective in addressing root causes. Men embracing physical disciplines beyond basic fitness, such as martial arts or endurance training, report not only bodily improvements, but also enhanced mental discipline that carries over into decision making, around opportunities and boundaries, reinforcing the overall framework of self mastery that defines their current approach to existence. The sobering reality for the wider culture is that continued failure to address male disillusionment through meaningful reforms will likely entrench these patterns further as each cohort of young men enters adulthood already primed with examples of the benefits of disengagement and the costs of unbalanced involvement. Delving into economic autonomy at deeper levels, men are utilizing decentralized financial tools and peer to peer networks to create buffers against institutional volatility, ensuring their resources remain under personal stewardship rather than subject to extraction through biased mechanisms. And this autonomy provides peace of mind that allows bolder pursuits in innovation or exploration without the paralyzing fear of loss through external claims. The authoritative raw perspective acknowledges that human societies function best when incentives align with natural behaviors, and the current misalignment has prompted a correction through voluntary withdrawal that compels realignment if balanced participation is desired in the future. This exploration continues by noting how leisure activities have evolved for many men into serious skill building endeavors like music production, woodworking, or digital creation that offer both relaxation and tangible outputs, fostering a sense of accomplishment that relational maintenance under duress rarely provided, and these outputs often become sources of additional income or personal pride, reinforcing the viability of the independent path. The storytelling cadence here captures the quiet triumphs of individuals who have transformed potential adversity into structured advantage by methodically addressing each area of life with intention. And this transformation serves as inspiration for others observing the results without needing direct persuasion. Women adjusting to these shifts may find opportunities in specializing fields that value precision and dedication, creating parallel strengths that could eventually foster mutual respect if approached with clear eyed understanding of changed dynamics, though the process requires shedding assumptions of default provision that no longer apply. Men have cultivated an appreciation for the subtle joys of routine mastery, whether in culinary experiments for personal nutrition or technical tinkering that solves immediate problems, leading to environments of self sufficiency that feel empowering rather than isolating. The wake up call resonates through considerations of global competitiveness, where nations that successfully integrate male talent and motivation through fair systems will likely outpace those that persist with imbalanced approaches. And this macro view underscores the importance of addressing domestic cultural challenges to maintain vitality on the world stage. In personal terms, the raw truth men live daily is that peace derived from alignment with reality surpasses temporary comforts of mismatched connections because it rests on solid foundations of self knowledge and proven capability that no external force can easily undermine. This segment of the discussion highlights emerging trends in personal technology use where men leverage devices and applications for self tracking, optimization, and learning, creating digital extensions of their disciplined approach that enhance rather than distract from core goals. And this integration represents another layer of adaptation in an increasingly complex world. The straightforward observation remains that after sufficient evidence accumulates regarding the outcomes of certain behaviors, the wise response involves adjusting course towards what demonstrably works, and men have done precisely that by prioritizing their own development and boundaries. Rhetorically, one can trace the threads of this change to fundamental questions about what constitutes a good life. And for growing numbers of men, the answer centers on freedom from unnecessary burdens, combined with pursuit of excellence in chosen domains, leading to fulfillment that feels authentic and sustainable over decades rather than contingent on variables outside their control. The authoritative tone here affirms that such choices reflect strength of character rather than retreat, because maintaining integrity in the face of pressure requires courage, and the results validate the decision through improved life metrics across multiple dimensions. Men often reflect on the contrast between past efforts to meet expectations and current freedom, noting how the latter allows for deeper appreciation of simple pleasures like undisturbed mornings or focused evenings that recharge creative and analytical capacities in ways that benefit all subsequent activities. This reflection builds resilience against occasional societal appeals for re engagement, because the lived experience of independence has proven superior to the promised benefits of participation under previous conditions. The sobering landscape ahead involves potential innovations in social technologies or community designs that accommodate varied levels of involvement without forcing conformity, and men positioned with strong personal foundations will likely engage selectively where value is clear and risk minimize continuing their pattern of intelligent boundary setting. This comprehensive view of the transformation reveals a multifaceted evolution touching every aspect of existence from daily habits to long term planning, and the men navigating it demonstrate remarkable adaptability that bodes well for their individual futures, even as collective society adjusts to the new equilibrium. We now push further into the global dimensions where similar patterns of male disengagement are emerging across different cultures and economies as information spreads rapidly through digital channels, revealing universal truths about incentives, fairness, and human nature that transcend borders. And men in various nations are observing parallel imbalances in their own societies, choosing self focused paths that prioritize personal sovereignty over traditional expectations of endless provision. And this cross cultural convergence suggests a worldwide recalibration is underway, driven by shared observations rather than coordinated movements. In regions experiencing rapid modernization, the clash between imported ideals of independence and local realities of economic pressure has accelerated the shift as men witness how unbalanced demands lead to personal depletion without reciprocal value. And they respond by building lives rooted in local strengths like craftsmanship, community trades, or technological adaptation that offer stability without reliance on systems prone to exploitation. This global view highlights how economic interconnectedness means that when men in one part of the world redirect their energies, the effects cascade through supply chains, labor markets, and innovation flows, creating new opportunities for those prepared with self reliant mindsets while challenging structures built on assumptions of perpetual male availability. And the sobering implication is that nations ignoring these signals risk falling behind in productivity and adaptability as untapped or redirected. Male potential reshapes competitive landscapes in unforeseen ways. Men are increasingly drawn to interdisciplinary learning where they combine knowledge from fields like engineering, psychology, and resource management to create personalized systems for thriving, whether that involves optimizing small scale agriculture for food security or developing digital tools that enhance personal efficiency. And this blending of disciplines reflects a return to holistic thinking that values practical outcomes over specialized fragmentation, encouraged by outdated institutional models. The bar conversation feel deepens when considering how these changes affect everyday decision making around career longevity, where men opt for roles offering autonomy and measurable results rather than high visibility positions tied to status that historically served as signals in mating markets, but now carry unnecessary exposure to cultural scrutiny. And this preference for substance over show fosters careers that sustain long term satisfaction and financial security without the burnout that comes from performing for external validation. Rhetorically, it becomes essential to examine how the erosion of mutual respect in interpersonal dynamics has prompted men to invest heavily in conflict resolution skills applied internally, where they negotiate with their own ambitions and limitations, creating internal harmony that external relationships under strain could rarely achieve. And this internal mastery becomes the bedrock for all other achievements. Women in these evolving environments may discover avenues for growth through specialized expertise in areas demanding consistency and innovation. Yet the process involves confronting the gap between narrative driven expectations and the unfiltered demands of self sustained living, which tests resilience in ways that reveal the true measure of independence when buffers of default support are absent. The authoritative rawness lies in recognizing that biological and cultural tendencies toward differential investment in relationships require conscious balancing to prevent one side from bearing disproportionate loads. And the current male strategy of withdrawal enforces that balance by making continued imbalance unsustainable, forcing adaptation through consequence rather than persuasion. Men deepening their exploration of natural environments through hiking, wilderness skills, or observational studies report enhanced mental clarity and connection to fundamental rhythms that contrast sharply with urban pressures designed around constant stimulation and consumption. And this reconnection with nature reinforces their commitment to minimalist approaches that honor resourcefulness and sustainability as core principles guiding daily existence. The storytelling rhythm emerges in the collective journey of men who have moved through phases of disillusionment to deliberate reconstruction, where each step builds upon lessons from observable patterns, creating lives of increasing coherence and purpose that stand independent of societal approval or relational contingencies. This phase uncovers implications for technological development, where men channeling efforts into open source projects, personal automation, or decentralized systems contribute to tools that empower individual agency, reducing dependency on centralized institutions prone to bias and inefficiency. And these contributions may accelerate human progress in directions that favor resilience and adaptability over convenience tied to imbalanced social contracts. The wake up call gains intensity when projecting forward to demographic shifts where lower rates of family formation lead to aging populations with adjusted support mechanisms relying more on technology and community innovation than traditional kinship structures. And men prepared through self development will likely navigate these changes with greater flexibility due to their cultivated independence. In examining philosophical traditions, men find resonance with ideas emphasizing virtue through self control and rational assessment of risks, which align perfectly with their current practices of boundary enforcement and resource stewardship, creating a modern synthesis that honors ancient wisdom while addressing contemporary challenges like digital distraction and economic volatility. The straightforward truth is that after sufficient accumulation of evidence regarding the outcomes of certain cultural directions, men have exercised their agency by choosing paths that align with their strengths. And this exercise of choice represents a fundamental assertion of maturity that benefits individual well being, even as it prompts broader societal reflection. Men often cultivate practices of reflective journaling or systematic review of personal experiences, distilling insights into actionable principles that guide future decisions with greater precision. And this methodical approach transforms potential setbacks into data points for where refinement leading to accelerated personal evolution that outpaces those entangled in repetitive relational cycles. Rhetorically, the long term viability of societies depends on fostering environments where contributions are valued proportionally to effort. And when that proportionality erodes, the natural response involves strategic repositioning toward domains where value creation remains under direct control, and men have applied this principle across multiple life areas with notable success. The sobering landscape includes potential for renewed dialogue if genuine efforts emerge to address documented imbalances in legal, cultural, and economic spheres, yet until such efforts demonstrate consistency through actions rather than declarations, the default remains continued focus on self contained systems of fulfillment and growth. This narrative thread extends to artistic and intellectual pursuits, where men freed from performative pressures produce works exploring themes of autonomy, human nature, and civilizational cycles, offering perspectives that enrich public discourse with unvarnished observations grounded in personal experience rather than ideological conformity. Men leveraging advancements in biometric tracking and cognitive enhancement techniques optimize their physical and mental performance, creating advantages in whatever fields they choose to engage, whether competitive sports, strategic gaming, or professional problem solving. And this optimization mindset reflects a commitment to excellence that stems from internal motivation rather than external competition for approval. The authoritative perspective affirms that human flourishing requires alignment between actions and realities of nature, and the men who have achieved this alignment through disengagement demonstrate its power through sustained improvements in life quality, metrics that serve as living proof of the approach. Expanding into community resilience. Men are building local networks based on skill sharing and mutual aid that operate independently of larger institutional frameworks, providing buffers against disruptions while fostering camaraderie rooted in shared values of accountability and competence. And these networks serve as models for sustainable living that could scale if broader society recognizes their effectiveness. The raw honesty in these discussions acknowledges that previous models assumed infinite male adaptability to unbalanced loads, but real world limits have been reached, prompting a necessary correction that honors human finitude and the need for reciprocal effort in all exchanges. This exploration reveals how dietary and nutritional mastery has become central for many men as they experiment with evidence based approaches to fueling their bodies for optimal function, leading to enhanced energy, mental sharpness, and longevity that further supports their independent lifestyles without reliance on external caretaking dynamics. The wake up call echoes through considerations of educational paradigms where incorporating more experiential learning and mentorship from accomplished individuals could realign young men with pathways that match their innate drives for mastery and contribution on terms that respect their boundaries and potential. Men pursuing mastery in linguistic or cultural studies often do so to better understand historical patterns of societal organization, gaining insights that inform their personal strategies for navigating change. And this intellectual curiosity transforms solitude into a rich environment for continuous learning that compounds wisdom over time. The straightforward observation remains that trust in relationships and institutions must be earned through consistent demonstration of fairness. And when that demonstration falters, the healthy response is protective withdrawal, followed by reconstruction on stronger foundations. And men have executed this process with remarkable discipline. Rhetorically, one contemplates the potential for hybrid models where technology facilitates more transparent and low risk interactions that allow selective engagement based on verified compatibility. Yet the success of such models will depend on addressing underlying patterns of behavior that prompted the initial mass disengagement. The sobering reality for future planning is that men who have secured their peace through deliberate choices are unlikely to relinquish it lightly, requiring any re engagement to occur on terms that honor their hard won autonomy and lessons learned. This segment underscores the creative problem solving that emerges when men apply their redirected energies to challenges like sustainable energy, personal security, or knowledge preservation, creating solutions tailored to individual and small group needs rather than mass scale systems vulnerable to imbalance. And these solutions often prove more robust due to their decentralized nature. Men have cultivated an appreciation for seasonal rhythms and natural cycles in their personal routines, whether through gardening, physical training, or project pacing that aligns efforts with periods of high and low energy, fostering sustainability and preventing burnout that plagued previous approaches. The authoritative raw truth here is that civilizations thrive when they integrate the full spectrum of human capabilities without suppressing or overburdening any group, and the current corrective phase through male repositioning offers an opportunity for such integration if met with honest engagement rather than resistance or denial. This narrative builds toward recognition that personal peace, achieved through alignment with truth, provides a stable platform for optional contributions that enhance rather than deplete the individual, making any future involvement more meaningful and voluntary. Men often engage with strategic simulations or scenario planning exercises to prepare for various life contingencies, sharpening their ability to adapt while maintaining core stability. And this preparation reinforces confidence in their chosen path of self direction amid uncertainty. The wake up call finalizes in understanding that the patterns discussed represent deep structural shifts rather than temporary trends, and navigating them successfully requires clear sighted acceptance of realities over comforting fictions that no longer serve effective outcomes. If you have made it this far to the end of this deep dive, you are part of the 1 hour gang, and I appreciate you sticking with it through all the layers because these conversations matter. If you're enjoying these Angry Guy videos, you can show support by buying me a Red Bull using the link in the description of the video. What did you think about what we discussed here? Do you agree with the patterns we unpacked? And leave a comment sharing your thoughts because hearing from you helps build the bigger picture. Like the video if you like it, do not forget to subscribe. And if you like the video, share the video. And just remember that all roads lead to MWA, men walking away in cheers.
Nothing says you care like crypto. Nothing can compare. Nothing says you care like crypto. Oh, nothing can compare to crypto.